Welcome to The State of Us.
Beyond mainstream cable news and party lines, with a millennial and a boomer, The State of Us pushes past the noise and uncovers all the issues that matter.
Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
A $15 an hour minimum wage could further sting teen employment. Young people who disproportionately lost jobs during the COVID-19 pandemic could struggle to find jobs, but they may also see raises. That's according to the Wall Street Journal. How Amazon crushes unions. From the New York Times, and older millennials are closing the wealth gap with their parents. Again, from the Wall Street Journal. We've got a lot to talk about today. We've got the young, the Amazon, the unions, right? And the nature of the American economy. It's plenty to discuss, but of course we couldn't possibly begin such a conversation without
TrueChat senior historian and an educator of more than 30 years. Here is your friendly redneck liberal, Lance Jackson.
Well, folks, here we go. The word of the day is a compound word, soulless, and it's directed at Amazon, but it could go with all of them. But, you know, it's a word soul that we throw out there all the time. Oh, the soul of this. Very generally, the soul, the definition we're going to use for today's word is the moral or emotional nature of man, meaning mankind. So the moral or emotional nature of man. And then the word less means not so much. So there you have it. And when you look at it and the argument for a $15 minimum wage, again, well, we can't do this because then we won't have as many jobs, meaning, oh, I got to pay more. So that's more money out of my pocket. Again, soulless. So there is, something to the fact that if you believe in capitalism, and I think that's a question that we all have today, but that part of capitalism is soulless as well. So I think the word fits in our discussion. So there you go. Soulless.
Soulless. Is that a hyphenated word? Or
no, that's just a compound word, but it's two words put together. So I think soulless. We needed to define both of them.
So a $15 hour minimum wage could further sting teen employment. Well, how is that? Well, let's take a look. The plan, according to the Wall Street Journal, that is to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour federal minimum wage by 2025, heralded by the Biden administration and Democrats. That plan, right, would also eliminate a youth sub-minimum wage that allows businesses to pay teens less during the first 90 days of work. The changes would give raises to millions of workers and lift some out of poverty, the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office has said in studies. So there's big benefits, right? I mean, economic benefits, according to this, lifting people out of poverty. But it has also found that about 1.4 million workers would lose their jobs over the next 4 years, many of them teenagers. Quote, young, less educated people would account for a disproportionate share of those reductions. End quote. It said in February, that's the Congressional Budget Office, on their report on the minimum wage proposal. So for those of you that don't know, we've talked about the CBO a lot, Congressional Budget Office, and it is, as mentioned, a nonpartisan congressional office whose sole job it is to look at proposals being put forward and to provide the whole picture, or at least that's what they're supposed to try to provide you from an economic standpoint. So what they're saying here is, look, it's going to lift millions of people, millions of workers out of poverty, right? That's wonderful. But you should also know that it's probably going to cause 1.4 million people to lose their jobs. And of those people that lose their jobs, as quoted in the article, young and less educated people, which, put two and two together here, right? That would be teenagers who haven't graduated high school yet. They're young and they're not really they're not, super educated yet relative to the rest of the workforce. Those are the people that are going to get hit the hardest. However, and I think this is what we want to talk about, there's ways to offset that we haven't really talked about, right? And I think the other thing, Lance, too, is the longer we wait on this, right? I mean, I talked about this, what was that, in 2019? The longer, particularly, that rural communities wait to catch up, the harder the sting is going to be, right? It may not be pleasant for 1.4 million people to lose their jobs, but the longer we wait, the worse and the larger that number will be. Well, I think anyway.
Well, to me, and you can say, the problem and that kind of stuff, but to me, the problem is it's the rich people who control the money who are complaining about raising the minimum wage. Oh, it's going to cause inflation. Oh, I'm going to have to raise prices. Oh, I'm going to have to. Okay, you're right. You are. Let it be. It should not be cheaper to eat out than it is to cook at your house. And that's where we are. A little bit of inflation. I know people don't want to hear this. Oh, it's going to be bad for the stock market. It's going to be bad. Okay, the people that are going to benefit from the minimum wage going up don't care about the stock market, or they shouldn't care about the stock market. That minimum wage going up, okay, these teenagers, I'm going to be controversial. Maybe they don't need to be working. Maybe they need to be spending more time on their schoolwork. My daughters they worked in the summer when school was out and had summer jobs because of the work ethic idea. But they ended up doing so well in school, they made thousands of dollars in scholarship money, which was 3 to 4 times more money than they could have made working a part-time job while they're in school. But back to this idea that it's the wealthy people that are telling us that we don't want minimum wage to go up. You ask most minimum wage workers, they want that to go up. Here's the other benefit. As minimum wage goes up, other salaries go up as well. Because if I can make that kind of money, if I can make $15 an hour working at McDonald's, then why am I going to work for $17 an hour in a factory where the job's a lot harder? So now they have to raise wages. Yes, I understand for all you economists out there, that's called inflation, okay? But it puts more money in people's pockets. It takes us out of the businesses, and we have to adjust our lives and begin to do what my mom and dad was, and that was we ate dinner at home every night. We had lunch at home. We cooked breakfast at home, and we didn't have and go to these places that have popped up that, if you want to really argue about it, make us less healthy, which raises the cost of medical care, which then raises insurance prices. So this whole mindset that they've tried to sell us out there, that we're better off with low wages so that we can keep prices down, is basically making us not as healthy and costing us more in other areas. So raise the minimum wage, raise wages, cause some inflation, and then all of a sudden people can adjust and be healthier and save money in other areas that they're spending money in now and be better off.
Well, folks, I thought that the second topic today, the Amazon crushing unions, was the one where we were going to get your friendly redneck liberal a little less friendly, but it looks like the minimum wage one did the trick too, right? So here's the thing, Lance.
Are you kidding me? $7.70, even though most states are higher. Are you kidding me? That's not a minimum wage. And again, if you want to go back, look at it historically, the minimum wage was not supposed to mean an entry-level wage. When it was started by President Franklin Roosevelt and the Democratic Congress back during the Great Depression, it was supposed to be a livable wage, okay? So if you want to change the name of it and call it an entry-level wage, that's fine. But don't call it a minimum wage and it be less than $8 an hour. And the fact that it hasn't gone up since
2009.
There you go. It hasn't gone up in 12 years. Really? There's been no inflation in 12 years? It's not tied to inflation? So there's no way it's a minimum wage. For the example, my daughter told me, and again, this was 6 months ago, but the $3.35 an hour I made in 1982 is worth almost over $20 an hour when you factor things in. So we're arguing over making $15 minimum wage in 4 years. Understand, folks, this isn't going to happen tomorrow.
Right. So by the time we get there, it's going to be
even further
less.
behind. But it ought to be at $20-some an hour to have the same buying power that I had when I was a teenager or a college student working for $3.35 an hour. So we're way behind where we were.
So I got
just facts, people. You can say I'm getting mad and I'm fired up. I'm just giving you the facts. I'm telling you the things that big business owners and the Wall Street people and the rich people don't want you to know. They want you to think that, oh, if you just continue to work hard at $11 an hour and $15 an hour, one day you too will own stocks and be rich like me, because they don't want you to be up there with them. So I'm just telling you what they won't tell you, and quit letting them hold you down and say, no, minimum wage should go up. Yes, there will be some loss at the lower levels for people entering the workforce. But, maybe that will then encourage people to go to college and find something they want to do that will pay more money, instead of sitting there saying, well, somebody pay me so I can play video games.
Well, he's given so much that I can't possibly address all of it, but here's what I will give you. Number one, 1.4 million people is less than 1% of the workforce. Okay. So we're not talking about a real big segment. And again, not to discount 1.4 million jobs, because I think too often when we do the economic stuff, right, it's easy. It's just numbers. No, those are people, those are their lives. And it's not just all teenagers, right? I mean, that's the Congressional Budget Office is saying, well, yeah, they're going to get hit, but there's other people too. So, but still less than 1% of the workforce. There are basically several things that Lance and I have talked about. One is the idea that any standardized federal minimum wage should simply be county-based, right? And maybe even smaller than county-based, adjusted for the cost of living everywhere, and should be set against inflation on an annual basis. So every year it's adjusted in local markets based on inflation relative to the cost of living in specific areas. That way, in little old Urbana, Ohio, you don't have people complaining because it's like, oh my God, you want us to pay people $18 an hour minimum wage? Because, I mean, truthfully, in Urbana, Ohio, right, you probably don't need that. But in California, $18 an hour ain't enough. So the point is, and that's why Lance and I have said this so many times, you just have to have a little bit broader sense than just, that's too complicated to explain to people. I mean, it took me, less than 30 seconds to tell you that, but it's too complicated because it doesn't fit in 5 seconds or less. Raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. That's sexy, or whatever.
But you're right. That doesn't solve the problem. It should be by regions of the country.
Yes.
I mean, because it should be based on the cost of living, and it should be a minimum wage. With this, you can afford a 1-bedroom, a 2-bedroom apartment, and pay your food and do the necessities of life. And then we can have a discussion about what a necessity is.
Sure. And talk about what gets included in that. But the point is, that's the formula that we should all use. And then if local areas want to raise it higher than that, that's fine. But
because you might get better floor. You might get better employees, because that's what's happening right now, right? When you look around, people need workers.
Yep.
And so the signs that I see, even though the minimum wage in Ohio is $8.80, people are offering $12, $13, $14 an hour at these fast food restaurants because they need workers. Supply and demand, capitalism. Yep. Amazing. Okay. Anyway,
the other thing I would say is 2 ways to offset the downside of this. Because again, it frustrates me that if you had Republicans that were willing to play ball, they could present some of these ideas. And if you had Democrats that were willing to think a little more holistically, then we wouldn't have to point these things out. But you say raise it to $15 an hour, you're worried about, right, losing workers and stuff. Two ways to mitigate this. One, is first and foremost, you offer them a tax deduction while you're in the process of raising wages relative to the amount of cost increase that they suffer as part of wage increases. Because those people are going to make more money, they have to pay more in taxes, but you can help the business offset the cost. The other thing is, so that's one option, right, to help mitigate that concern about, well, businesses are going to have to lay people off. Well, no, they don't. If you do what I just said, they don't have to lay anybody off unless again, they're not spending the money the quote unquote right way, right? And then maybe they still have to lay people off. But with that, you don't have to. And the last thing is you can exempt the smallest of businesses from this. They point out in the article, this story of this girl that works at a bakery in Ohio, right? Okay. I mean, yeah. And I think absolutely, having grown up in a small business and stuff, if you've got 10, 20 employees, or less, right? Raising it to $15 an hour, you may not be a money hungry person. You may have no choice but to let people go. Well, maybe you exempt the tiniest of businesses from that. If you have less than 50 employees, less than 20 employees, you decide whatever it is. I hate the small businesses have, 500 employees or less. I mean, what the heck is that? I'm sorry, but having 10 employees and 500 employees ain't the same thing. It's just not, it's different. So I think that's another thing, right? Because McDonald's, et cetera, those kinds of places, they can probably figure out ways to do it without having to lay off people. You get into some of your smallest businesses, you want to mitigate that. You want to not accidentally force them out of business. You could look at things like that, tax deduction relative to the cost of increasing wages and or exempting them from doing it, or you could give them the choice. You can do one or the other, make up your mind. So the point is, there's lots of ways to do this, folks. No, it's not going to be pain-free, but it's something that's probably long overdue. How does Amazon crush unions? Well, it's not necessarily a new story. It's just with new characters. We're going to find out, though, how and why. Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
In a secret settlement in Virginia, Amazon swore off threatening and intimidating workers. As the company confronts increased labor unrest, its tactics are under scrutiny. A opinion piece, I believe, from the New York Times. Actually, no, this is just a news article, isn't it, Lance? So, okay, so tell us, Lance, how does Amazon crush unions? And people should know, our friendly redneck liberal, right? Union man for 30 years or so. Still, that's either a pro going into this conversation or a drawback, but either way, we want you to go in eyes wide open. And remember, tell us what you think today. I forgot to mention that in the first segment, but we want your thoughts. Send us an email, please. It's podcast@thestateofus.org. Send us an email, podcast@thestateofus.org. What do you got for us, Lance?
Well, I was going to say the same thing, because remember, folks, this is a conversation. If you don't agree with what I'm saying or what Justin says, let us know. If you agree, let us know. That's what conversations are about. We don't want this to be a one-sided discussion, okay? But again, historically speaking, if you look at labor unions, they are now in the depths. The fewest number of people belonging to a union right now in the United States is as low as it's ever been in our history. And here we are talking about all kinds of economic situations. For those of you who think America used to be better, which I'm not necessarily of that opinion, because there were a lot of things socially that were wrong. But if you are one of those people that think that way, you should also realize that the highest level of union participation in the United States was back in the 1950s. And for many of you that I know that I've talked to who want to go back to those times because you say that was when America was great, well, unions were at their highest levels at that point. People were, there was power to the worker, okay? And unions are the ones that do that. But to Amazon, all right? 5 years ago, when we know that if you not up to snuff, the vote in Alabama, Amazon, the workers at Amazon in the factory in Alabama, voted down having union representation, which is fine. The people voted and they voted no. That's fine. But 5 years ago, before this happened, Amazon was compelled to post a notice to employees on the break room walls of a warehouse in East Central Virginia. And it said things like, "We will not threaten you with your loss of a job if you are a union supporter. We will not engage in surveillance of you. We will not interrogate you." So 5 years ago, okay, Amazon promised in a settlement with federal regulators to tell workers that it would rigorously obey all the rules in the future. Now, if you've looked into Amazon, yes, a very successful company, but they've done it on the backs of their workers. While this is a good thing in some fashion, Amazon was founded on notions of speed, efficiency, and hard work, lots of hard work. Placing his first help wanted ad in 1994, Jeff Bezos, Amazon's founder, said he wanted engineers who could do their job in about 1/3 of the time that most competent people think possible. When they first opened up, Customer service representative, it was difficult to keep up, according to media accounts and labor organized. Overtime was mandatory. Supervisors sent emails with headings like, "You can sleep when you're dead." So they have a very strong work ethic, but there's a gentleman here talked about, a Mr. Huff, who was told when the conveyor belt was breaking, and he protested that restarting the belt while he was working on it, meaning that his fingers could have been taken off. His manager told him twice, "Quit your bitching." Well, eventually that gentleman led a union drive, and Amazon said to him that he was on the verge of being fired. Amazon said it would rescind the warning. 6 months later, in August of 2016, Amazon fired him anyway. Mr. Huff was in the hospital having surgery when Amazon called and said he had used up his medical leave. And since he couldn't do his job, he said he was told this was the end of the line. He said, "That's Amazon." He's now 56 years old. He said, "There was no mercy, even after what they had done to me. If you give 110%, if you can't give 110%, you're done." Amazon declined to comment on Mr. Huff. There's the soulless people. Yep, American capitalism. There you go. We pay well. We're going to work you to death, literally. And when you can't work anymore, then we'll fire you and replace you with somebody else.
Well, and how long we'll have to worry about it, remains an item of a lot of debate, something that I guess it's not raising the alarm, but I just think it's so worth mentioning is that many of the jobs that are done in Amazon's warehouses are limited in how long people will be doing them. I am 100% convinced that I will absolutely live to see the transition of Amazon to a almost completely, robotic workforce in terms of its fulfillment of orders, right? I'm not necessarily talking about the corporate side of things, but who's in the warehouse? How does the package get to you? They're working on it right now, folks, because you don't get to be a $1 trillion company. You just, think about that, right? That's larger than the GDP of many countries. You don't get to be a $1 trillion company and not think about these things. And that's part of why they work their employees literally to the brink of death, because, and that's that disconnect, I guess, that just keeps coming into mind. The business, right, exists to further its own interests, right? That's why it exists. It is organized for the purpose of making money. So it's going to look at all the ways it can make money, and it's going to exploit them to the maximum extent legally possible. And sometimes to the extent beyond legal that it thinks it can get away with.
Well, that's why we have a minimum wage, right?
Right.
I mean, the minimum wage was established because the government said you can't work people for money less than what they can live on.
10-year-olds and, and you can't work them for 14 hours a day.
We passed laws that said that. So we have it in our history that if we don't like, to your point, if we don't like the way workers are being treated, then we have to step up as a society and pass the laws that we say this is the minimum treatment you can give to a worker.
Most of us would balk at the idea, right, of an 8-year-old going to work in an Amazon factory. We'd be like, "Are you crazy? A 14-hour shift for an 8-year-old? Oh my God, that's got to be dangerous." Well, that would be way safer and way less dangerous than what we were putting 8-year-olds to work doing 100 years ago.
Right, 150 years ago, exactly. The whole idea of overtime pay was through strikes and unions, and the government saying, "Okay, we're going to have a 40-hour work week, and you want somebody to work more than 40 hours, you have to pay them extra." That's all laws, people. That's not like, well, that's just the way it's always been. People fought for those rights to get put in there by the government.
Nobody needs to hate Amazon for wanting to make money, but also, don't hate the workers for wanting to be treated fairly. I mean, that's that two-way street, right? It's, okay, we need each other, right? You need us in order to make money. And we need you to make money, right? I mean, we both need that. So how do we do it in a way that everybody can be okay with and where nobody feels like they're getting the shaft?
Well, but Amazon's made some changes. They've hired physical therapists. They've done certain things to try to get, but again, then it's up to the workers to say, okay, now that's fine. Or does society say that's fine? Amazon's doing the least they have to do to try to placate the workers in society. And so we're just what are we doing? We're having a conversation between Amazon and its workers and the federal government. And that's where we are right now. And we're in the midst of this. And we'll see when the government and the workers feel that Amazon has done enough.
Well, some good news on the horizon, possibly. Older millennials are closing the wealth gap with their parents. We're talking about raising minimum wages and how mean Amazon is. But hey, some millennials, looks like they might be making some headway here, right? We've talked about for a while, they might be that first generation to be worse off than their parents, but maybe not. So what's going on there? What's the story? And notice older millennials. Well, there's more to talk about. Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
Some millennials in their 30s are starting to own homes and save more. In 2019, the net worth of households headed by people born in the 1980s was about 11% below where researchers expected it to be based on older Americans' wealth at the same age. That may sound bad, but it's a huge improvement from the 40% gap in 2016. Okay, right? All relative.
Right.
All relative. In 2019, it was 11%, and in 2016, it was 40%. So in 3 years, Lance, some major gains there made by older millennials. Those are 1980s millennials. Your 1990s millennials, however, and that's part of what the article points out, however, households headed by people born in the 1990s, which includes younger millennials like myself and older members of Gen Z, were 50% below expectations in 2019. This suggests that patterns of establishing wealth may have permanently shifted. Young people now start off with more debt in their 20s, but then start to pay that off, buy homes, and build savings in their 30s. The researchers also found that millennials now owned homes at rates similar to prior generations at the same age. The analysis, slated to be published online Tuesday, didn't break down the specific factors that narrowed the wealth gap. So unfortunately, we don't know what exactly is contributing to the narrowing of the wealth gap. And the other big glaring thing, obviously, I'll point out here is this is data through 2019. So we don't yet know how the COVID-19 pandemic and the recession and now the subsequent recovery. For those millennials, here's my idea, Lance, and folks can follow up on this. For those millennials that are fortunate enough to have already become homeowners like myself, the pandemic probably resulted in a net gain for them. Probably. Okay. For those that didn't, it might have been a bigger struggle, right? Because we're seeing that those home prices are going up. I didn't get to tell you, Lance, but we got the appraisal back on our house, and it was $20,000 or $30,000 higher than I thought it was going to be high. I was amazed at what they think my home is worth. I mean, I am now looking at, I bought the home in 2017, right? And it has gained almost $80,000 in value since it was purchased.
Just want to explain to people the median net worth of households that Justin was talking about. Net worth is calculated by subtracting a person's liabilities, like mortgages and college debts, from assets like home equity and stock holdings. So when we're talking about those percentages and numbers, that's how it's figured. And that is, okay, you're making X amount of money and you own these stocks or you own this property or whatever. Okay, now we're going to subtract, what do you owe for your car? What do you owe for your house? What do you owe for your college, loans and all that kind of stuff. And that's where we've seen the change in the growth. So if you're one of those people like my daughters who have taken out loans to further your education during this time period, you're not part of this growth. So again, it depends on where you've spent your money and how much in debt you had to go to get to the place where you are currently. But you're right. Overall, things seem to be getting a little bit better. But it all happened before the pandemic, and did the pandemic wipe out all these gains, and are we starting all over again? And, again, it's like anything else. When you buy is great, right? If you bought Bitcoin at 5,000, you're still happy. If you bought Bitcoin at 50,000 a month ago, you're really upset right now. It's all timing, right? When it comes to economics and money.
Well, and so I think one of the things to highlight here is that permanent shift, right, in how people acquire their wealth. And remembering too, we talk about this a lot, right? Millennials are the children mostly of boomers. So it's not terribly surprising that their home ownership rates, the older millennials, are now pretty similar to boomers at the same age. Now, it took them longer to get there, right? That's an important note, because when we talk about cumulative wealth, right, for retirement, if it takes me 10 years longer to get there, it doesn't really matter if at age 38, I own a similar value home as my parents did. If it took me longer to get there, right, just like the other stuff, I'm still actually behind. So I guess there's that important caveat.
The rule of 7, right?
Yeah. Well, the compounding interest, right, and the gains that you can have. I mean, that whole thing about the minute you can buy into the stock market or put aside savings or whatever, because the sooner you do it, the better it is, always, even if it's tiny, right? Anything is better than nothing, and the more you do it and the sooner you do it, the better. So that rule definitely applies, and I think that's an important caveat. I guess what I'm saying is it's not terribly surprising, because when you look at millennials are the modern era boomers, right? I mean, in many respects, they're a boomer 2.0. And that's part of why I'm sure we've seen some of that friction, if you will, between Gen Z and millennials. Even though they're right up against each other in terms of generations, there's some real, Gen Z making fun of millennials and similarly making fun of boomers in some cases, because they do share a number of similarities. And one of them is obviously now that homeownership is relatively similar across those lines, where it's not likely to be as similar for your Gen X and children who are Gen Z. So yeah, things are shifting, but as always, it's right, as time goes on, we learn more about how it's shifting. So I think it's great that we're seeing some improvement there, because it's been an item that you and I have talked about for basically 10 years since the show started, that millennials are worse off on the whole than their parents. And that still, unfortunately, is true. It's good that it's getting better, because I don't think we as a country, right, should want any new generation to be worse off than the previous generations. The goal would always be that each generation gets it a little better than the last.
Well, we've wanted that, but is that one of those misnomers? You know what I'm saying? Is that
depends on the generation?
Is,
right?
Is that kind of like we, you work hard, keep your nose to the grindstone, you'll be successful? Really? I mean, it's one of the things we tell you so that you will stay in line and follow the rules.
And you might.
But is it really a reality? Because if you go through history, has every generation ever really gotten better than the predecessors? I don't think so.
But that sales pitch works, right? Because I mean, for example, you worked your butt off your whole life, right? And I mean, are still fighting the system,
Well, it worked for me because I lived at the right time. It didn't work because I had a better work ethic than other people, which is what people my age want to argue. Well, I work harder, so therefore I'm successful.
Well, then why are you still working so hard?
I worked hard because it's worked for me.
Right.
So I believe in it. Okay. Mm-hmm. But when I look at the way things are right now, and minimum wage is $8.80 an hour, I don't know why you would be working hard, because it's not, because, like I said earlier in the show, that $3.35 minimum wage that I worked for now should be $20. And how much harder would people work if the minimum wage was $20? I mean, how much, again, where's that incentive to work?
People may feel like this is thrown in here, but I just got to mention it. The more time that I spend with young people today, and I'm talking about Gen Z as a millennial. So, this may be that boomer side of me, right, coming out and talking down on the generation behind us. But I do think, and it really isn't their fault. I mean, in fairness, you want to blame somebody, you blame their parents, you blame the tech companies. I think that there's a big component of this that we're struggling with figuring out, which is that tech component because you didn't have to fight that.
Right.
You know,
You're right.
and that's not a taking away from boomers and their hard
Nope.
work and all that. It's just, it is a totally different, addictive, time waster, brain frying system that makes it harder to go work because you are lethargic and you are fed things and you don't have a good attention span. And having worked with multiple Gen Zers now, it's across the demographic spectrum. Poor households, wealthy households, black, white, male, female, they are all struggling with it because of the laziness component, right? And working as hard as boomers did, not necessarily, I'm not saying that's good because I think we've talked about the wage thing and it has to be worth it and et cetera. I think there's this other big component of it that even if we fix all of that, we're going to run into some issues with. And we've been headed for it anyway. We've been talking about it for years. We are headed to some kind of, turning point in society where we decide we're either going to do something about it or we're not.
No, I mean, I had a landline, a transistor radio, and a TV that got 3 stations.
Right.
If it wasn't storming outside. And we were told to go outside and we rode our bike. We walked, we played, played ball, and we read books.
And as you get older, then you work because there is a limit, right? There's not but
I was in constant movement. I never sat, other than reading,
right.
I never just sat and stared at something and gave me information. I had to get out and go. And so I have in those formative years. And so now I have this desire to get out and go. And to your point, devices don't push that. We'll just sit here and it'll all come to you.
Right.
There's no get up and go. There's no gumption.
The purpose, right? Tying back into the earlier segments, the purpose of companies is to make money. Facebook doesn't make money if you go get up and quit looking at the app. They make money if you're on your butt with your eyes on the screen. That's when they're making their money.
Exactly.
So keeping that in mind, right? That's where they're golden. That's where they're earning. And so everything they can do to keep you right where you are on your lazy butt, right in front of your screen. Oh my gosh, I've spent 2 hours looking at this. What did I look at again? Oh, I guess it doesn't matter. And then you go back to looking at it, right?
Yeah.
Just making the money.
That's right.
Making the money.
Cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching.
That's right. Make that
Facebook,
sausage.
Not in your life, but in Facebook's life.
Exactly. Exactly. Yes. So let us know what you think. Send us an email, podcast@thestateofus.org, because this is a conversation, Lance, right? That's our mission here.
True Chat's mission is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. We've been honest and open and respectful, at least tried to be. If you disagree with us, let us know. Podcast@thestateofus.org. But get your friends to listen. You like the show. It's stimulating, thought-provoking. Share it, folks, because that's the way we're going to make the changes that we need to make. Tell them they can find us on Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, and everywhere podcasts are found.
You can hear new episodes Tuesdays and Thursdays by 4 a.m. Eastern Time. That's for the podcast version of The State of Us, and on the weekends in select talk radio markets around the country. For The State of Us on True Chat in Urbana, Ohio, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson. Don't let the soulless people win.
Special thanks to our recording producer, Gen Zer, Bradley Butch. Thank you all, our audience from across the generational spectrum, for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.